and welcome to another video. Finally, it's been a long time coming, but I've got 3 kids now. So, and I'm new to this whole 3 kids thing. I do have hubby here, but it's definitely still a little challenging. Most of you guys know who follow me on Instagram, and if you saw the home birth video, I have a son and he was born on May 6th. And I really wanted to film actually his update and my postpartum update before this, because that's kind of how I've done it in the past, but it's kind of tricky to find a good time to film with him. Like, I really want to film with him in my lap. Or not my lap, but you know, like me holding him, but he just constantly wants to feed. When he's with me, it's just boob time, like period. So I don't know how I'm going to manage to film that update. He's starting to have more not only boob time with me just today. So maybe in a couple days he will just sleep in my lap. I hope so, because there has been a couple times where he's just fallen asleep on me and that's been really nice. But anyways, this is turning into a whole other video. Today we're going to film the birth story because I have a little bit of time. Hubby's decided to whip out the carrier with him and just see how that goes. So let's go ahead and go on with this birth story. So as a lot of you guys probably already know, as I've described on Instagram, I would describe this as probably my most intense birth. I wouldn't describe it as my most painful, but it was the most intense and I was the loudest. So let's go ahead and just like rewind a little bit. I actually hardly mentioned, I didn't say anything about this in the pregnancy vlogs, nothing about it on Instagram, but I had a crap ton of prodromal labor in this pregnancy and I didn't really want to talk about it until afterwards. I don't know why. I just was like really introverted about this whole process this time, and I'm quite glad that the birth was actually very like private and sacred, and we didn't even film the actual birth itself. Well, we couldn't. There was no time. My midwife hardly had time to put on gloves. I'd say like a week and a half, maybe like 10 days before the birth, I thought that I could possibly go into labor like any day. Like I would have regular contractions that were anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes apart, but like they would be like consistent all afternoon, like every 10 minutes apart some days, every 20 minutes some days, but literally would always go away by evening. And I never talked about this in any of my pregnancy vlogs. This was the most prodromal pregnancy I ever had when it came to labor. Like I had a little bit with the girls, like especially Olivia. I had like maybe 1 false alarm with Leia, but this one, it was like every day for 10 days. I thought maybe today, but then I would always be let down by evening. So when things actually properly started was on May 5th at 5 in the morning, 5:45 in the morning, my waters broke and they started just trickling out while I went to the bathroom, I went back to bed and I kind of dozed off, and then I started feeling like I was peeing myself a little bit. Like there was like a little trinkle and I was like, babe, my waters definitely broke. And I was like, can you just like go get one of those puppy pad things, like these like diaper things that we had for the home birth that you put all over the floors to keep things from leaking all over the place, like next to the bed, so that when I get up I leak onto that and not onto the floor and onto our carpet. So he got up and he got a pad for me, and then it really started coming out. It wasn't like heaps, it was just like, you know, I was peeing myself kind of, and I checked it to make sure that it was like clear, because obviously meconium could be a sign that baby could be in stress, and I just wanted to make sure, and it was all clear, and I was like, okay, that's a good sign. So I'm like, we're off to a good start then. And from that point onwards, I was just honestly like feeling like, oh, well, it's gonna be really fast probably. I bet you it's gonna be one of these like fast bursts. I was like shaking, like trembling at this point, because I was like really excited, like a mixture of excited and scared, because when my waters broke with Leia, I was already in labor. When my waters broke with Leia, I was already having regular contractions. So when they broke with her, after we went for a walk, like maybe an hour after they broke, my labor got really intense and she was born pretty shortly after my waters broke. So I was like expecting this labor to just kind of start like at one point during the day, and then and then yeah, have the baby really quick, especially since it was my third. But then like the whole morning, nothing happened. I mean, I came up here in this room actually, and I did my morning meditation on the bed, and I did have 2 contractions that were like 5 minutes apart, and like I was like, oh, these are definitely like labor contractions. But then when I went back downstairs, they stopped like completely, and I just had like loads of Braxton Hicks like contractions that whole day. Oh, one of the first things I did was contact my midwife, and I let her know when the waters broke. I was like, okay, well, we should try to get things going, and we needed to do our weekly shop anyway. Saturday is our weekly shop day, so I was like, let's just go get our food. And I put on like giant maternity pads, and we headed off to the store like you saw in the vlogs. And I had thought that most of the water had come out, but there was like loads coming out in the store, and I definitely noticed that when I was walking it was definitely like a lot more. So I was like, man, when am I going to be done getting rid of these waters? But my midwife did actually tell me later, like after the birth, that I did have more water than I did in my pregnancy with Leia. My midwife even predicted that that's how my labor would start, because she said like this was my biggest baby and I had a crap ton of water. So she had a feeling that I was like going to pop. And like when I was talking to my husband, like just 2 days before my waters did break, I was like, do I not literally look like I'm about to just pop? Like seriously, and that's literally what happened. I just popped essentially, and that's how the labor started this time. I've experienced kind of all ends of the spectrum when it comes to the waters breaking. With Olivia, they never broke. She was born in her sac. With Leia, they broke in the middle of the labor, and this time this is how it started. So I've experienced all of the fun. But to be honest, this is not what I would have wished for. Like I remember thinking that, especially as the day went on, I was like, this is not how I would have wanted my labor to start, just because there is that added pressure of if your waters break, you're kind of on a time limit because you're at risk, a higher risk of infection, the longer your labor doesn't start. So in Germany, in the hospitals, they typically like to intervene around 12 hours. My midwife was like, I'd give it a day and a half. And she's like, I'm pretty sure with you that things will start in the evening. Often it does. So I was pretty stressed out that whole day. I just felt like, you know, especially since I went like only 3 days past my first expected due date. I actually went into labor closer to the due date I guessed based on my ovulation, actually. My guess date was May 7th. He was born on May 6th. I just felt like we had been waiting for this little guy, or this little one. I didn't know what it was yet, even though I was pretty sure it was a boy. We had been waiting for so long because we thought that I was going to go into labor possibly at like 36 weeks. And then my waters broke. And I was like, yes, now it's just going to go really fast. And then it was like, still nothing. I was just like, how much more waiting am I don't think I can take any more waiting. I don't think I can take any more of this patience thing. And I definitely started getting kind of antsy, and I blew on so many dandelions that day. I was born at the time where there's just so much dandelions, so I wished and wished like the whole day that things would just happen, and mostly that things would happen smoothly and safe and hopefully quickly, because that's what I had been hoping for this whole pregnancy, was like a short labor. Easy too, which there's no such thing as easy labor in my opinion. I know some people say that it exists, but I don't know how. We go for a family walk after dinner, and I'm kind of not in the best mood when we go for the walk, to be honest. I'm a little tired and my pelvis is starting to hurt again. I'm starting to get the pelvic pains. And then we go home and everybody just kind of goes to bed kind of late, I would say. It was Saturday. We tend to let the kids stay up a little longer on Saturdays. And I did an evening meditation, and then I just decided to go to bed myself because I was like, well, there's still hope that it's just gonna start on its own tonight. And I made a wish on the evening star, and that is actually like that evening star now. Every time I see it, I definitely think of that night, and I think I'm always going to think of him when I see it. I made a wish on the evening star that we could see through our window, and sure enough, I started getting really regular contractions at 10:30 very shortly after that. And They were like every 5 to 7 minutes. And this is like the most or the shortest duration and the most regular I've ever had contractions. I've always had very irregular contractions all the way up until my birth came to the end. So I was like, well, it's definitely started, that's for sure. And the contractions were like probably, they weren't super intense when they started, but they were like more interesting than the ones I remember having when my labor started with Olivia and Leia, which those labors were like 2 days long. So yeah, I remember using that star as a focal point for a while, and I did just some relaxation. I was just like, well, it's bedtime. It's definitely going. There's no reason to try to intervene. I was like, just trust and try to get some sleep while we can, which we didn't get much sleep. Hubby got maybe half an hour or an hour of sleep or so. I can't remember, but at one point I woke him up saying, okay, so let's go downstairs because I'm just getting kind of antsy now and I feel like I would feel better being downstairs. So yeah, we go downstairs and I'm having more contractions and they're coming closer together. They're like every 3 to 5 minutes apart, lasting about a minute long, so they're pretty good ones. And I remember still feeling like quite positive, quite like calm and tranquil, and I was just like, yeah, I can do this, I've got this, it's fine. You know, I'm like, I think the hypnobirthing worked, definitely. And then like we both tried to doze off downstairs. There was only certain positions that I could stay comfortable in, and also I noticed when I lied down they kind of slowed a little bit, so I kind of wanted to keep myself sitting up, and that was more comfortable anyway because he was active throughout the whole labor. And as you guys know, I told you that he was jabbing my cervix like so painfully for weeks, and at that point the cervix jabs were almost more painful than the contractions, and when I lied down they were really uncomfortable. For some reason, sitting in either a crisscross position or like just sitting on the couch and like leaning over the birthing tub and like using the birthing tub as a pillow, the edges of it, or the birthing pool, sorry. Me and hubby decided to go back upstairs and try to get some more sleep. I'm like, well, I think it's still probably gonna be a while because like I'm a doula and I kind of know, like I was kind of reading myself in a way the best that I could because I was in a bit of a different state as you are when you're in labor, so I wasn't totally conscious like full-on doula Danielle, but I was like, well, these contractions aren't gonna have a baby anytime soon. Like I'm too calm, unless I'm handling it super well, but I was like, I don't think so. So I was like, let's try to get some more sleep. And then we go up and I decide to listen to my hypnobirthing CD just to calm me down because I was a little bit nervous, and I was like, well, let's try this out. And actually it was really nice. Well, it wasn't a CD, it was just like from my audiobook, and I only listened to it one time the whole labor, and it did help calm me down. And I did have quite a few contractions because it was like a 30-minute track and I was having contractions every 3 to 5 minutes apart, which would sometimes space, there would be like always a random contraction that would space like 7 minutes apart, just out of nowhere. Just, yeah, I didn't get too discouraged about it just because that's how all of my labors have been. I've always had like kind of irregular contractions. It didn't mean that things weren't progressing, that's just how it always was for me. So yeah, there reaches a point after the CD is over where I'm like, I definitely don't want to be lying down anymore with these contractions. So I was like going to the bathroom and I was handling a couple on the toilet, and I was like in shock. I couldn't even make it to the toilet without having a contraction. And then I would come back into the room and I was like, oh my god, I'm having another one. Like they were like happening on top of each other, but they were only 30 seconds long, and I wouldn't even say they were super duper painful at that point, but they were like definitely like painful. But weirdly, it's so hard to explain. Actually, I say painful because like that's like the way most people describe contractions, but this time we'll talk more about this towards the end, but the only way I can really describe my labor pains this time around was just really powerful and really intense. They weren't like they were with my girls, where with Olivia I felt like this fiery sensation around my belly and cervix area. With him I got a little bit of the fiery heat feeling, but with Leia, it was horrible. It was just like somebody was like stabbing my cervix with a knife. It was like a burning knife. And with him, the only way I can describe it is extremely strong, forceful, powerful surges is the best way I can describe it. And they just completely took me over. And I started moaning quite early in my labor. I didn't start moaning more towards the end with Leia's. I was very panicky and frantic with Leia, whereas this time I was really like in between the contractions. It's like I was like on drugs. Like I was like literally, I was like rocking my head and swaying, like just like some sort of weird drug. I don't know. I've never done drugs before, just so you know, but you know, when you watch people in movies who are on drugs, like I felt like I could look like one of those people who are like totally drunk and on drugs. And so in between the contractions I was like totally high and I was totally fine. But during the contractions I turned into like this like really primal like wild woman who would like moan like crazy because the amount of power in these sensations were too much for me to internalize. I had to vocalize this time around. And yeah, so I kind of went back and forth from the toilet to our windowsill where all of my crystals are, and I was looking at the stars. I never saw the moon once that night. I was hoping to see it, but I never saw it that whole night. So I was just like using stars as focal points. And that was the most helpful, I would have to say, was actually, I don't know, I mean, I do like to wear crystals and I do think that they are quite helpful, but I didn't think that they would be that helpful. But at one point I decided that I wanted to go downstairs because I didn't want to wake up the kids and I was starting to get loud and Leia was starting to whimper in her sleep. So I was like, let's go down. And then at that point I was like, let's ask my midwife if I can get in the pool. So my husband called and asked if I can get in the pool, and she's like, no, that might slow things down and we don't want things to slow down. So I'm just gonna come over. I wasn't actually calling to tell her to come over. She just decided to come over. So I was like, okay, she must think she has a need to come over. So I was like, all right, let her, but I don't think she has to come. But it's kind of good she did actually, because things happened better when she got there, that's for sure. So yes, we go downstairs and I'm just having like so many contractions. They're not as frequent when I was sitting crisscross, but they were a little further apart from each other, but they were really, really strong and lasting for very long periods of time when I would sit down. But every time I would get up, I would have a contraction after a contraction, like transition basically. It was just like every 30 seconds, and then the contractions would only last for like 30 seconds, but they would be really powerful. They wouldn't like be mild. It was the weirdest labor ever. And at one point, even when my midwife came, I felt like this, like it felt like a butt labor again, like I had with Olivia too. Like I just felt so much of the pressure in my butt area, and I kept telling Hubs, I was like, my butt hurts so bad, even though I'm pretty sure I said my ass hurts. My ass hurts so bad. I kept telling him that, so my butt did actually kind of hurt. That was one painful thing about this whole process. So trying to backtrack here, my midwife comes and she like observes and she's like, yeah, these are good contractions, and I'm like, you don't have to tell me that, I know. Yeah, she's like, do you want me to check you just to see like what the position of the baby is, just to make sure that everything's in a good position and all that stuff? And I was like, yes. Well, actually before that she checked with the fetal Doppler to see the heartbeat, and that was the first time I heard the heart rate the whole pregnancy. And in between contractions, that was the first time I was like able to like really smile and kind of feel like normal, because it was really nice to hear his heart for like the first time the whole pregnancy. And he was doing good. So yeah, then she's like, well, let me check you. She didn't check me like first when she got there. She's like, there was quite a few contractions before she decided to check. I was like, yeah, but you know, I don't want to be checked because I don't want to hear a discouraging number. And she's like, I don't think it's going to be discouraging with these contractions and with this being your third. And I was like, trusting her, I was like, okay. And sure enough, she goes in. And she's in there for freaking ever. Like, I'm getting kind of pissed off, like, to be honest with you. But don't worry, there's a reason why she's in there forever. She's not really able to find my cervix, and that's weird because at 36 weeks, when she went in there, she was able to find it straight away. It was really low. It had already, like, you know, basically descended and I was put on bed rest. She couldn't even, it was so far back, it was a posterior cervix. I was having like full on labor contractions, like with a posterior cervix and with the water broke. And she's like, normally the cervix has to come forwards before labor actually starts. And she thinks because the waters started the labor, my body actually wasn't ready to go into labor. Like, I guess my bed rest and all my meditating about wanting to keep him in worked, because my cervix went right back up there. And my body was just keeping him in, essentially. And it was the weirdest thing ever. Like, this pregnancy was so weird. And very, very uncommonly happens that you have contractions every 2 to 3 minutes apart with a posterior cervix. And that's probably why I felt them so much in my ass, because my cervix was essentially like right up in my ass almost. So what she was doing was not only trying to find my cervix, because it was so far back, she was trying to feel how open it was, and she was also trying to bring it forward, which apparently you can do. So she brought it forward, saying, like, in her head, she didn't tell me anything at this point. She was just like, okay, she did tell me that I was half open. I'm not sure why she decided to tell me. She's like, yeah, so don't worry, it's half open, but it can go very fast. She's like, with these contractions, I think it's gonna go really fast. And I was like discouraged, because I was like, 5 centimeters? And I told her, I was like, this is a lot more intense than it was with Olivia, because with Olivia, I got checked at being told I was 5 centimeters. And I was like, this is nothing like that. You know, like I was way more comfortable with Olivia at 5 centimeters. So being a doula too, and I've seen it happen, like people go, and with Leia, I went from like 2 to 10 in just a couple hours. So I was like, okay, I'm not gonna let myself get upset about this. I made the decision in my mind, I'm not gonna let myself get upset about this. I decided to go to the toilet. I had really big contractions, and I was like, nope. I basically disagreed. I was like, not 5 centimeters. I'm going to be done with this soon. And then I was like telling her, I was like, I want in the birthing pool. I'm like, there's no way that the birthing pool is going to stop my labor at this point, that I need some sort of relief. I want to see if it helps. And she's like, okay, yeah, we do the birthing pool now. So hubby fills up the birthing pool, and it's really hot when I get in there, and she's like, oh, the temperature's fine. And I was like, okay. But I really liked that it was hot, actually. Because like I was really able to, like, it was like the first bath I had in a really long time, and I was like, oh yeah, feels really good. and then came a contraction, and I was like, nope, the water didn't help. I was like, this didn't help at all. This just horrible in the water. And then I had another one. I only had like 2 contractions in the water, and they were pretty on top of each other. And that second one, I just like sounded like some sort of weird primal animal that I can't even name. And I like spread my legs in there, because like I felt like all of a sudden this huge, like I could literally feel myself open, and I could feel him coming down like all at the same time. And hubby was like, oh my god, she's like dripping sweat. Like I was just dripping sweat at this point. And I was like, I have to get out of here. I'm like, I hate the water. I hate it. I feel like, because like I wanted to feel grounded. I think it's because I basically only had 2 contractions that opened me right up. Like, so basically I went from 5 to 10 and like 2 contractions is what I'm thinking, something like that. And like I needed to feel more grounded, because I was getting closer to the pushing phase. Like I honestly don't know how some women, you like the water. Like I hated it. Like there was no way I was gonna be able to give birth in there, because I felt floaty. I felt weird. I felt like I needed to feel my feet on the ground. So I was like, I'm getting out of here. So I get out, I go to the toilet. I have 2 contractions, and they were very similar to how they were with Leia in the pushing phase. With Olivia, I had such a relaxing time. It was just like I went from transition to a break. Like I didn't have any contractions for a while, and then I got the urge to push. It was just like an urge to push. It wasn't like a super painful contraction that felt a little bit like I was still opening, but at the same time like bearing down. So I was on the toilet, and I was like, oh gosh, I feel like I have to poop like so bad. And hubby was like, you know, because I said the same thing with Leia. And my midwife, I come into the room, and I'm just kind of getting ready to deal with some more hell. And oh, one thing I said in the birthing pool too is I was getting a little bit panicky, because I also was like, I don't want the girls to see me like this, because I was louder than I had remembered being in my other pregnancies. I was like, I don't want them to see this. I just really don't. So I feel like my midwife bringing the cervix forward is probably what helped a lot with the birth, but I also really do believe in the power of the mind and the power of setting intention. And I truly believe that, you know, I wanted to protect my girls. Like, I was like, I want to have this baby before, you know, they wake up. And we were at sunrise at this point in time. So again, it was another one, like, I felt like I made the decision that this was going to be over soon, and sure enough it was. My midwife was not prepared for what was about to happen, me neither, but I was like just coming out of the toilet, just ready to sit on the couch. I was like, okay, I'm gonna sit here, I'm gonna handle some more hell. That's basically what I told Hubs. And then the next thing I know, I'm like just about to sit down to do that, but then I get another contraction and I stand up and I'm like, holy crap, his head is like coming out. Like all of a sudden, like with that contraction, I didn't have to do anything. My body was just, he was coming out. And my midwife is like, oh, you're probably just feeling pressure. And I was like, nope. I'm like, with my hand in between my legs standing up. And I'm like, there's a head, like halfway down the birth canal, basically, maybe more. And she's like, oh, there's a head. And then she's like getting her gloves on. And then I just squat. And it's very interesting how this all happened, because I had a birthing stool for my other birth. I went from birthing stool to just full on professional squat on my own. And I had like my hands on each side of the couch, and hubby was like supporting me, and he actually watched the whole birth this time. He watched him come out. And yeah, it just took like another contraction and he was already crowning, and I'm screaming my head off because like his head is a good deal bigger than my girl's, where he's a boy, so he has a bigger head anyway, and his head was slightly above average for boys, whereas my girls are girls and they have girl heads, and they were slightly below average for the girl head range. So I mean, I'm just screaming my head off. I'm like, it burns, it burns, it burns. I don't know how people with like, you know, kids with really big heads do this. Like, you know, he was a whole pound and a half bigger than Olivia and Leia, but he, like, the body didn't even notice, but the head, when the head's bigger, that's really hard. So okay, I had to get another battery. Sorry for the change here, but I ran out of battery. So what I was saying was, I think we were talking about me screaming my head off because of pushing him out. So he did take a little bit longer to come out than Leia did, and hubby watched the whole thing, and they were like telling me, like Hubs was like, okay, here comes the ears and stuff, and I was like, okay, well that must mean I'm almost there. So that was actually really, really helpful. He came out, and it's always such a bit of like a weird blur to me when they come out, like what happens. Like with Leia, she was placed right to my chest, but I'm not sure exactly why. I could ask my midwife, but she like caught him, but she put him on the floor for a second. I think she was trying to get something, because we had not really set up for this birth to take place. I think she was trying to keep things from getting everywhere or something. I don't really know. But he was like on the floor and he cried, and I was like, why is he on the floor? And I was like, why is he not why is he not screaming? He was just like sleeping. Starting to get hungry again, so I better hurry. Sorry, this is a bit rushed, but I just have no time these days. Yeah, I grab him and I'm like, are you okay? Are you okay? And she's like, oh, he's perfectly fine. He's breathing. See, everything's fine. And he had pink lips, and I was like, but he's so like relaxed. Like he was basically like, he came out and he was just like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go back to my nap now. It was so weird. And he ended up getting like a 10 on his APCAR score, just like his sisters. So I was surprised, because I was like, is it normal that he came out not screaming straight away? But she's like, no, some babies don't need to scream. She's like, some babies don't have as much fluid and all these things. So poor little guy. I discovered the sex, and yep, he was a boy. And I remember just like thinking, oh, I knew it. Like I knew he was gonna be a boy. This pregnancy was so different and so weird compared to my others. And one of the other first things I thought about him was, wow, he looks like, it was like a Leia flashback. Like I looked at his face and like his little head and just everything. I was like, this is like crazy. Like they could be twins, is the way I felt about it, and still do in a way. And I was just like, oh my god, he's so freaking cute. And like it really didn't sink in that I had a son until like we were like cuddling. And I remember because like I was still high as a kite from like the natural birthing drugs that your body exudes, which is pretty amazing, and why I choose to do it without any drugs in a way. Well, there are a lot of reasons, but I said something like I started crying, and I was like, you know, I never had like my dad left when I was really young, and I just felt kind of like I don't know, it's just so hard to explain, because I grew up in like a solemnly female household. So I felt like it would be interesting, because I didn't really get to experience like a father-daughter relationship. So I thought it's nice that I'm going to get to experience having a son in a way. And in a lot of ways he does look like my dad, and it kind of is scary because it's just so hard to explain. You'd have to know my family and my family history to understand the whole situation. But I was like saying funny things like that, like things that I didn't even, like feelings were coming up that I didn't even know existed, you know? And I would have been happy either way with a boy or a girl, but it felt really special that I had a son, you know? So, and you know, I also wanted to finish on a note talking about the screaming. I am actually really, like, even so, I felt like it was awesome. Like, I know so many people think it was so awesome that I kept my cool during my birth with Olivia and Leia, but honestly, scream. That's just what I have to say. You don't have to be calm. You can study hypnobirthing and you can have calm orgasmic births if that's what you experience, but don't force it, and don't feel like you failed if you were loud or if you experienced it to be really intense. I think like I've just come from like an entire year of doing a lot of reading on just untamed femininity, and I just feel like we don't have to be super prim and proper and, you know, be quiet when we give birth. Like, just be loud. We don't have to be tame. Just let your wild woman loose. You know what I mean? That's just how I felt about this birth. Like, it was just very wild. It was very primitive, and I feel like I was just unshamefully and unapologetically letting myself go, and that actually made it, I mean, it was an intense birth and there's nothing I could have done about that, but it made it better, because I wouldn't even describe this birth as painful. I would just describe it as intense. Like a power that was above me was just like a force field was just like going through my body. And even though I felt like I couldn't do it, and I said it so many times in the birth, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this, I did do it, and I was doing it. That's the thing that and that's one of the things I always tell my clients when they say they can't do this. I'm like, you are doing it, you're doing a great job. And yeah, I'm actually really proud of myself for just letting myself go this time, and it made it so much easier. You don't have to, I don't know why I felt like I had to stay proper, and you don't, I mean, if you want to have drugs and stuff like that, like by all means have it, but in hospitals I feel like they're so quick to offer the drugs because they just don't want to hear the women just be loud and just do their thing. Like, I think it's fascinating, and I know it's weird, but this is a very doula midwife kind of mentality. We love screaming. Like, whenever I'm at a birth, I mean, we feel for the woman, of course, who's going through it, but we do know that more screaming usually means there's a baby coming soon. So we get excited about that kind of stuff. I know it's sick, but it's true. So I'm really happy with how everything went with this birth. Like, it was just wild. It was faster than my other two. I mean, I was still kind of like hoping for only like 2 or 3 hour birth, but can't complain. 8 hours isn't bad for me. Misses two days with my other two. So I think I'm gonna go. He's probably hungry. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful. I always like to share my stories. I just think that there's something so powerful about sharing birth stories with each other, because even though we all go through such different experiences, we can all usually find some sort of middle ground and understand where the other's coming from. And there definitely needs to be more Like, I just don't think that birth should be as secret or as taboo as our culture has made it out to be. So real stories is what people need. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Bye.